Hey everyone, this is Anthony Dittman from Kilowatt Events, and we're really happy today to start our educational series on internet and connectivity with FeedWire. And I'd like to introduce Damian Clark, who's the owner of FeedWire, and Chris Katopoulos. Damian, why don't we kick this off with you describing a little bit about your company, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Sure. FeedWire is an IT consulting company. We've been in operation since 2002. Our customers are in a variety of verticals, but in this context, what's important is live television and live event production.
Fantastic. Well, we're really happy to talk through this today. I know our company and clientele, our general clientele, is always trying to permeate this mysterious crossroads of technology and connectivity. So I think this will be really helpful um, as an educational point, particularly during COVID, where we have a little bit more time to educate ourselves and hopefully be a little bit more effective and efficient in the future. So I think to set the stage, any client really wants the best coverage for the cheapest price and the guarantee that the network won't go down. Is that fair to say?
Right. Sure. Yeah. Every customer has needs, and we want to make sure we identify and meet those needs. I think maybe is a better way to say it.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So let's dive right in. So is there a basic question that you guys ask or we should ask ourselves when we're debating between a hardwired connection and a wireless connection, and what are the cost implications of those two?
Well, let me step back to the overarching design methodology that we use for building a network, right? So um, our first step is the network is a multi-customer system, not dissimilar from the power system, right? Like it has to service multiple internal customers within the project. And so our first step is to identify who all of those customers are and what their requirements are. Customers could include activations, POS systems, outbound or inbound streaming, digital delivery, uh, Wi-Fi and connectivity for the production staff, convenience Wi-Fi for the guests, and the list goes on. It varies by event,
Mhm.
but those are some pretty common customers. So then for each customer, we need to understand what their physical footprint's going to be, what their bandwidth requirements are going to be, what the consequences are if they have an outage. And we take all that information to design a campus-wide network.
Sure.
Yeah. And bandwidth distribution, it's really not dissimilar from power distribution, right? Like with power distribution, you've got constraints at each distribution point. Each distribution point can handle a certain amount of current. And if the aggregate of the downstream load uh, is greater than that current limit, then the breaker breaks
Right.
and things go sideways. With bandwidth, it's not as dramatic. It's not as binary. It's not like the power is on and then it's off. Instead, performance degrades and experiences worsen.
So how do we protect that when analyzing between hardwired and wireless, either from a macro level coming into the venue or actually into a device at a micro level?
Right. So into the venue, they're basically indistinguishable. A dedicated point-to-point wireless system is effectively a fiber in the air.
Mhm.
It's not quite as reliable as a fiber, but it has very similar performance characteristics for our use cases. Uh, Inside the venue, a wired connection is much more reliable than a wireless connection. So if we have things like streaming or activations, we want to get those wired if at all possible.
Great.
What wired networking works a lot like a telephone, and wireless networking works a lot like a walkie-talkie, right? And if you have to choose what you're going to use,
Yeah, for
you
reliability.
you Right. Yeah. You want to use a phone. The walkie-talkie, it's not as easy to have a conversation.
Now, I recognize there's a lot of factors that are going to change the cost of installing a hardwire versus wireless, including
Sure.
most obviously the length from the point to the end point. But is there anything that we can tell our clientele to use as is it a factor of three? What's a general idea of the cost differential?
It's really hard to come up with a rule of thumb for cost
I
because
imagine.
a single access point costs more to deploy than a single hardwired connection.
Mhm.
But a single access point can service, up to like 150, 200 customers reliably, devices.
Okay,
And so it really does depend.
great. Okay.
I think instead we should consider the stakes and the bandwidth requirements, not the cost.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish that was reality, but as we know,
Well,
it's not always. But
we get to a budget from two sides, right? We can say, here's everything we need. What does it cost to make this entire list come true? Or we can say, here's all the money we have. What's the best that we can do
mhm,
for this money?
sure,
And we end up giving and taking between those as we negotiate. But I do like to start with the needs, say like, this is everything you said you wanted, and here's what it'll cost to give you all this stuff. And we can make it cost less by taking away or reducing this list.
sure.
Yeah,
That's great. That's a good baseline to start with because I
right.
think it's often a critical component, and people have to recognize how important that is to them. So, what would normally cause a network to go down?
Uh, Power.
Sure, sure. That's an obvious one. Is that the only one?
Overutilization
Yeah.
can also affect the network. Um, Physical damage. We've seen access points and cables get run over by uh, cars or
Chairs.
forklifts. Yeah.
Yep.
Even a chair rolling over in an
Oh, sure.
office. I mean, some of those get pretty, like some of the production spaces with if there are hard lines, they're kind of spider webbing all around. It's really easy because everything's sort of impromptu and temporary. So, it sometimes things have to run across the floor. Something like that could be an issue. Also, sometimes people see a switch that has been put on a desk and has a few hard lines in it, and they look at one end of the cable and go, "What's this?" And they plug it back into the switch, creating a loop. But we do have protection for that, so that it doesn't damage everything. But it can definitely cause an issue locally at that place. So if you don't know what it goes to, don't plug it in.
I was just
That's
gonna
the rule.
say, if you don't know what it is, don't touch it.
Yeah,
Great.
don't try to
Um,
help.
all right. So, what will 5G ultimately bring to the table? And will it
Yeah.
be
That
available
so I
for
think
events and its pending location now, right? It's not available everywhere.
right. It's not available anywhere, and most devices aren't compatible with 5G. I mean, they're compatible up to 4G. Um, it should make our jobs easier. The promise of 5G is that if you need internet and that's all, you won't need to rely on local infrastructure most of the time. You will all you'll need is a cellular connection to 5G if all you care about is internet. And there are a lot of applications that don't require local connectivity. They just require internet.
Wow.
Some still do require local connectivity. There are many POS systems where you've got printers communicating with tablets, and that's happening over the local network, or offices where you're printing locally. If you've got some kind of file server, which is uncommon but not unheard of for events, that's happening over a local network. And so in those cases, we still need to construct a local network, but we probably won't have as many customers for it.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, when do you think 5G will be pervasive as it relates to it being available in a certain area, and also all the devices being?
Yeah.
tuned
I,
into it?
I would give it like 5 to 8 years.
Wow.
People hold on to their cell phones for a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. If one vendor or client has a large and private need, is there any way to piggyback off of that for cost efficiencies to better service the entire event, or does that need to stay dedicated?
Well, the cost of bringing bandwidth into the event goes up as the total bandwidth increases, but it's not a linear scale. So ballpark, if you double the bandwidth, you're probably going to increase the cost by about 25%.
Oh, okay. That's good.
So it's right. So it's efficient to have a single network with multiple customers and divide up little slices for each. It's more efficient to do it that way than to make entirely separate networks for each customer.
Right.
And then when you're negotiating guarantees for bandwidth, depending on the application, you may be able to oversubscribe your users a little bit. So if one customer says, I need 100, and another customer says, I need 50, but when they say need, they mean they want to be able to go up to some of the time. You can stick both of those in a single 100 megabit allocation, and they'll both have access to up to the speed they need, but they won't all be guaranteed that speed all the time.
Right.
That works for things that are like spiky traffic, like syncing Dropbox or browsing the web. That traffic is spiky. It's not consistent. Something like streaming is consistent load the whole time.
When we're operating an area of poor cell service and we have a certain number of guests, what number of guests would you say would start to require adding a public Wi-Fi to that event?
People who produce events universally overestimate how many of their guests are going to join the Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost no one. Almost no one ever does it.
Interesting.
And you probably don't produce many events that are in areas with bad cell service, because events tend to happen in places where people congregate.
Sure.
Right, and those are places where the cell network tends to cover.
Got it. That makes sense.
I do have a comparison of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No, to add to that, I was just going to say there's a couple scenarios there too, just for like specialized use. For example, like let's say you have a red carpet scenario where, production is concerned that key people, won't be able to tweet or Instagram or something like that if cellular service is poor. That's one thing. I think in some cases, in terms of that free Wi-Fi, it can be helpful. And we can service, 25 or 30 users with a standard access point that's localized, maybe under a bleacher or something like that. But on the other hand, there's like what we're calling like an audience Wi-Fi, which is something else entirely. Then you're getting into, into something that's much, much larger. I mean, like I know with COVID, limiting audiences now is kind of a thing. But, in the past, it might take an array of high density access points that are probably rented from a third party to handle something like that. So there is a huge cost involved. And like Damien said, at the end of the day, when we've done these things, we found that many people will just use cellular if it works. And typically it does. But cellular can get overloaded too, like in really large venues. That's also a possibility to plan for if that's something that's like a big part of your production. But yeah, most people aren't going to go through the hassle. And when I've looked at the results during the event, when we thought all these people would be connected, there might be like 20 users or something like in a gigantic space. It's like, this is just one event in particular, but yeah, it's true. So just think about it wisely. It does add a lot of cost, and it's not necessarily convenient. People don't necessarily trust the Wi-Fi a lot of times too. So, if you're building a budget, something to think about.
Is it wise for people to join a public Wi-Fi at any point? Is there a risk?
Public, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, for
Got it.
sure. Yeah, there's a risk to joining public Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Um,
Whether there's a password on it or not, doesn't matter.
Doesn't really matter, no. I mean, anytime you join a network, you are allowing the person who owns that network to inspect all of your traffic. Most systems on your phone require encryption, but it's just not necessarily the case that your safety and privacy is guaranteed.
Moving on to MiFis as event operators, is there any risk using MiFis? Not necessarily from a security perspective, but just from an operational perspective, and certainly this might be like the first 2 weeks of load-in. Is there anything we should be hesitant about using MiFis at that point for consistency?
Not really. I mean, if you know that you control the network, you don't have to worry about joining it. You know, and the cellular providers are not inspecting your traffic with malicious intent.
Yeah.
They're selling your activity,
yeah.
but they're not doing anything worse than that, most likely.
From my experience, they're pretty consistent. I don't recall ever having a MiFi go down. Or do you guys have any experience with that?
Right. The issue with MiFis is that if your footprint requires you to use more than one, when you move between them, you lose access to resources that live on just one of them, like printers. So it can become complicated to manage local network keys.
Sure. Got it. All right.
I do think, though, that I did want to make a point, though. I do think that MiFi is sort of a roll of the dice. I mean, you know, your availability of internet can change if you move around, if you're outside, if you're in a trailer, if you move to a different location. I mean, it just depends. Like for basic, you know, like typically Wi-Fi, it's best used, in my opinion, is like more of a last resort if you're in a remote area and there are no other options, or if you don't have enough lead time to get proper service. I know it's, you know, it's cheap and it does work, but, you know, also it can be used as a backup and when no other service is available, which is nice too. But, you know, it's super cheap and you can rent a couple of them and it's super easy. But, you know, I just think that, yeah, you just never know what you're going to get. It depends on the application. If you're doing like just basic office work and you're looking up things on the internet and answering emails, then great. If you're trying to stream a Zoom conference or do, you know, some downloading or whatever, you just never know what you're going to get. I mean, speeds can be good, you know, if you've got a 4G signal and 5G's, you know, on the way.
Sure.
So just making that point. It's, to be honest, like the best advice if you're going to use MiFi is to do a little scouting ahead. If you're going to a location, like test the waters with a cell phone, you know, in tether mode, or see what the service is like, because companies like Walk and Talk, which do a lot of rentals in town, you know, they can offer Sprint, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, lots of different options, and they don't all work the same in each area. So you never know what you're going to get. If you get something that works, then great, then it's going to work. But just, you know, don't guess, because I've just seen people in that situation where they're all excited. They got all their MiFis together. Everybody turns them on and it's like, you know, everybody's getting a few megs of internet and that's about it. So also MiFi is kind of, I feel like that's a term for a brand of cellular internet.
Mm-hmm.
But Cradlepoint is a business class or like a small business router type thing that has a USB cellular modem connected to it. And those are typically the best ones to rent because they have hardline connections on the back. You can attach printers, you can do other things with them. And if we're going to use it as a failover or something, then it will have the outlets to be able to plug into our equipment so that we can have it fail over if the main connection goes down, that sort of thing.
I think most of your events are primarily outdoors. Is that true?
Yes.
Right. And so a booster is useful to improve the signal strength through some kind of barrier. But
Right.
if the signal strength isn't present in the geographical area, then a booster isn't going to help much. You know, if you take a low quality signal and make it louder, that doesn't actually improve anyone's experience.
Right. Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah, so that there are analogies between wireless and audio that I think are useful to understand. So what wireless communication is very much like talking on a walkie-talkie, like we touched on before. Only one radio can talk at a time. If two radios broadcast at the same time, both of those transmissions are lost and have to be rebroadcast.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You've experienced this on walkie-talkie.
Sure.
And so if the constraint for wired networks is the uplink bandwidth, the constraint for wireless networks is airtime. How much time can you spend transmitting, receiving, transmitting, receiving? And there are two factors that make that a little bit more complicated to manage. So one is that as the distance increases, the efficiency of that airtime goes down.
Right.
If I'm standing right next to an access point, I can transmit at like 500 megabits. If I'm standing very far away from an access point, that can drop down to like 20. Right?
Sure.
And so in the same unit of time, which is our ultimate constraint, I can get much less information through. And then the other complicating factor is, like I said before, that only one radio can transmit at a time, or the communication is lost and has to be rebroadcast.
Right.
So that makes Wi-Fi a little more complicated to design. But I did set up an example to help you visualize that. I have two examples of just a very basic predictive wireless survey for the Surfer Girl Pro event. One where we plan on having 500 guests on the network, and another where we plan on 2,500 guests on the network. With 500 people, we call for 4 access points. And they're basically evenly distributed throughout the floor plan. You can see the little green dots, maybe, maybe not. But those are the access points. And with this coverage, with 500 people, we expect that airtime will be fairly healthy. You can see all the airtime is in the yellow on both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands. If we switch to 2,500 and ask the software to help us place access points, it now calls for 20 access points.
Oh, wow.
And so this helps us plan how much coverage we need to deliver for a certain number of wireless customers over a certain area.
And it's good to know you guys do this much pre-work to ensure success for the event. This is really good to see. So along with the same, we're talking about bandwidth as we continue to make sure that we're able to provide the service, not you guys provide to us, we're ensuring that our clients have this too. Is there a special or standard requirement that POS systems need that we should be cognizant of?
Yeah, POS requires almost no bandwidth.
Okay.
It's really
Should it be dedicated?
Very low bandwidth.
Should
we want to protect it, right? We want to identify who our high value customers are, and POS is definitely high value.
Yeah. So it should be a dedicated network that does not have it doesn't require a lot of bandwidth.
Correct. We want a dedicated bandwidth tranche in our overall network for POS traffic.
Fiber is a topic that comes up occasionally. Is that
right?
Anything that we should be paying attention to? Fiber versus
There's two contexts for fiber, right? So for delivering bandwidth to the venue, if there's already fiber present at the venue, then that will likely be the highest quality bandwidth available to the venue. Within the venue, fiber lets us extend the network farther than copper. Ethernet is limited to 100 meters.
Okay.
And with fiber, we can, on a single segment, we can go 40 kilometers.
Great. Okay. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Uh,
I've never done it.
But
there are fibers that go across the ocean, you know, so.
Sure, of course.
You know, Anthony, I just want to make a point about fiber. One thing that we often do is coordinate with some of the video stuff that's going on around the venue, and
with
we
TV?
can combine resources, yeah, with TV, and say, hey guys, you're already running this fiber, you know, around the building twice and down into a tunnel and up to where I need it. Can I just have a pair of that, you know, fiber, or a couple pairs for my switch? And they're like, a lot of times they have it. So that can also save on costs and time, and boxes of Cat5, which may not even, if it's too long, we can't even do. So it's just something to throw out there for people watching.
Yeah, that's a great point. As it relates to cable and how critical sustainability is these days to the event producers and the people attending the events, it's an important piece. Can this cable be reused? I know fiber can, but do you? And it seems like Ethernet always gets thrown away. Is that still the industry standard?
Yeah, I mean, the cable that you see us run, that we're pulling out of boxes, that's solid core cable, and it is designed to be installed once. It's not designed to be reused. If you flex the solid wire too many times, it breaks.
Got it.
And even if it doesn't break, a tiny crack can disrupt the flow of electrons down the cable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and of course, fiber is fragile too, but it's very expensive. So people are eager to take care of it and eager to pack it up and take it to the next show with them.
Yeah, and tactical fiber, which is what you usually see run at events, is designed to be respooled and redeployed.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a lot about.
But the shorter Ethernet cables that are typically pre-made, those are made with stranded cores, and the stranded copper wire is meant to be reused. It is more flexible.
Got it. Okay. We've talked a lot today about access points. So let's back up and just explain an access point, explain how it's connected. Is that hardwired in, or is that also wireless? What we need to do to attach it? Does it have to have an open purview to the venue, or could it be tucked behind a bleacher, as Chris mentioned, putting some equipment behind bleachers? Does it want to be open to the public? So just run us through an access point, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so an access point is a device that extends our wired network wirelessly.
Okay.
Right, and it doesn't technically need to be wired into the network, but it does need to be powered. And there are two ways to power an access point. We can either power it with AC power, or we can power it over Ethernet. If we power it over Ethernet, then we get the advantage of a wired backhaul. If we power it with AC power, we need to use a wireless backhaul, which doubles the airtime load of all traffic. So since airtime is our constraint, anything we can do to save on airtime gives us a better experience. So ideally, every access point has an Ethernet cable, and that Ethernet cable provides data and power to the access point.
So it takes very little power to operate an access point.
Right, yeah. There are special switches called power over Ethernet switches that can supply power and data to devices that are connected to them.
Okay. And does it need to be totally open to the venue, or could it be tucked behind something?
So we can go back to our audio analogy. The less material between the antennas, the better the quality of the signal will be. And signal strength is not the only metric. It's an important metric, but imagine two scenarios. One where you've got a speaker installed under your floor, and another where the speaker is in the room. In both cases, you turn the volume up until the sound pressure level is the same.
Mm-hmm.
One will sound worse.
Yeah.
The quality of the signal will be degraded, even though the strength of the signal is the same.
Yeah.
And so we can tuck access points behind things, but it degrades the signal quality, and so throughput will be reduced. Airtime utilization will go up.
Got it.
That said, the materials that tend to block Wi-Fi are those that contain metal or water. So if the material
people have water in them, so
people have water,
right?
yeah, exactly. We're just bags of water. Plaster
Yeah.
has water. Wood tends to have some water.
Concrete.
Concrete definitely has water.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, keep in mind though, it depends on the application as well. Like what
Right.
Damien is explaining is how the signal can degrade under certain circumstances. But if the goal is to only supply, a signal in very close range to a few individuals, then chances are whatever's happening to that signal won't be noticed in the experience that that person is having doing a basic operation on a mobile device or a computer. So it really starts to be a bigger deal when people get further away from that, or the demand on that access point gets larger. That's when you're going to start noticing things start to really slow down. When, that's when all those things really matter. So, in some cases, like, yeah, we'll just throw one over there and it's not a big deal. No one will ever know that any of that is going on. But if that's the technique for supplying internet to the venue, then that's a problem.
Right. So this may be a silly question, but if I'm working in an office trailer and it's the first day of load in and I just have a router in the corner of the trailer, is that arguably the same thing on a micro level as an access point? A wireless router?
It contains an access point. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
When people use these words interchangeably,
Mhm.
people will say router, and what they mean is an all-in-one appliance that has a modem, a router, a firewall, a switch, and an access point.
Okay. Sure.
Those are all
Good to know.
different components, but we call them, firewall or router or modem.
Yeah.
But there are different components.
And on its most macro level, it's an access point beaming it out to a larger area. And what is the limitation of a single access point? 200 feet?
Sure. I mean, as you get further away, the signal strength and signal quality degrades. So it just depends on what you're trying to do.
Okay.
And it varies by manufacturer, by antenna.
Okay.
Yeah, some antennas have different shapes, like depending on how, like if it's facing people, it might have a different pattern versus what's going on the sides, or what's, if you're standing behind the access point. So there are a lot of variations there. I mean, they all have posted specs. They'll say like, oh, this will go 200 or 300, square feet. But the reality is cement, metal, water, glass does weird stuff, shoots signals, can make it do weird stuff. So yeah, there's just a lot of factors.
And we would rely on a company like FeedWire to counsel on the best shape of an access point or best manufacturer of an access point, right?
Yeah, that's something that we do as part of the predictive wireless survey process, is we draw in all of the materials on the map so that we can predict how they're going to affect the propagation of the wireless signal. And we also drop in the simulated access points that correspond to the actual real world access points we deploy.
Got it. Okay.
So different antennas, omnidirectional, directional, different signal strengths. It really is similar to designing an audio system.
All right, just a couple more questions. What are some options to tap into for an event if it's so remote that there's not an actual provider in the area, like Cox? or similar?
Yeah, so that's pretty tough, right? Because you're talking about an infrastructure issue. What do you do if there's no plumbing? What do you do if there's no power? What do you do if right? Yeah, and it just becomes increasingly difficult and expensive to the point where at some point it's not feasible.
Mm-hmm.
So well, let's just talk about all the different technologies we have for delivering internet. There's the telephone and cable networks. Those are consumer grade delivery technologies. They're using a system that was designed for a different use case to deliver internet, right? Like phone lines were designed to deliver phone calls, but if you put DSL technology on them, you can get internet over a phone line. The cable network was designed to deliver television, but if you put cable modem technology into it, you can get internet over it.
Okay.
And those tend to be low quality. The maximum peak bandwidth may be high, but other characteristics of an internet connection are lacking. They tend to be higher latency. They don't have guaranteed bandwidth. They don't have symmetrical bandwidth. And so, but they're available almost everywhere and they're pretty cheap.
Okay.
Then we've got purpose-built internet delivery systems like fiber or point-to-point wireless. And those are systems that were built to deliver internet and we use them to deliver internet. Fiber is vastly more expensive because you have to actually run a piece of glass all the way to the handoff point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just expensive to do. So probably not a good candidate for remote events. Fixed wireless is what we'll look at for most remote events and also a lot of in-town events. The advantage of fixed wireless is that the last mile delivery happens wirelessly, which means it can be installed with very little construction cost relative to fiber. Companies that sell internet service, they have construction costs that they recoup over the duration of your contract, right? And with fiber, that can just be tens of thousands of dollars of construction costs.
Yeah, absolutely. We did an event at the top of Whistler Mountain one time, and the TV trucks were at the base, so we had to run fiber the entire way. But that is a TV budget, not just a regular old event budget.
Right.
So.
Right. And how much did that cost?
It was tens of thousands of dollars. So.
Right. There you go. Fixed wireless, though, is not universally available. There are providers everywhere, but it's just what's available depends on the location.
Yeah.
And you don't really get to change what's available after you choose the location.
Right, and no one picks a location.
Right, that's huge. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
right. We've had
spot.
some.
Where's internet?
What was our? Oh yeah, we worked on a production. What was the production where the guy jumped out of the plane with no parachute onto the net?
Oh yeah, that was a Stride, sponsored by Stride. He was it was just a Stride thing.
Heaven Sent, was that it? No.
Heaven Sent, yeah, that's
Heaven
it.
Sent.
That's it.
It was a remote desert location, and we just got lucky that a wireless provider had an antenna on a ridge that they'd been using to service people on the other side of the ridge. And they were able to mount one and point it at us and hit us on the unpopulated side of the ridge.
What's the biggest thing that event producers generally don't communicate properly or underestimate when it comes to connectivity? When it comes to a connectivity order for an event, our last live question.
Right. I think that they underestimate the costs. Right? Like the relationship between what they're asking for and what it costs to deliver that.
Yeah.
We can always deliver worse for less.
Well, we feel the same way on our end of things too. So yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a big factor. And the bulk of that cost is usually getting internet delivered to the location. Because once you go over a certain requirement, a certain threshold, which is what a cable modem can do, you move from the hundreds of dollars to the $10,000 plus range.
Yeah.
It's a pretty steep cliff.
And what about access points? Is adding another access point a significant cost?
No, it's like a few $100. The marginal cost of each access point isn't that high.
Okay, good. All right, so final question is there anything in the future that we should be looking forward to, looking towards, either technology-wise, making your job easier, our job easier? Obviously 5G is looming, but is there anything else out there that's exciting?
Well, 5G is really the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Right, because that'll take the load off of the local network to provide internet-only connectivity.
Okay.
And that's it. There are some other technologies that we can use to maybe make installs go faster. We can use local point-to-point wireless. We've done that for events.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than running a fiber across the audience to get to the stage, we beam something over their head. Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I've done that a few times.
Yep. Just make sure the street's closed, Chris.
That's
my job. All right, guys. Well, this has been amazing. We really appreciate the time, and we hope that everyone that sees this just has a greater insight into what you guys do and how we can better communicate to you guys to have a successful event. So we look forward to doing that soon.
Yeah, let's produce some events.
Let's do it. All right, guys. Have a great day. Thank you.
Take care.
You too.